So in this case, Kirkman in DP World Melbourne, an employee had made an unfair dismissal application and attempted to have a report that was prepared by an investigator be provided to him for the purpose of providing his evidence. In this case, DP World claimed that the report was subject to legal professional privilege. And importantly in this case, the employer had engaged solicitors to actually provide written instructions to a separate investigator, and the investigator provided the report, which was marked private and confidential, or privileged and confidential, to the solicitors, and the purpose of it was to provide the solicitors so the solicitors could provide legal advice to the employer. In this case, the Fair Work Commission found that the report was subject to legal professional privilege, and therefore the employee wasn't entitled to receive a copy of the report.
I think one of the key issues here for employers is when obtaining a report, from whether it's from a solicitor's, a factual report, it's really about the dominant purpose, and bearing in mind whether you want the documents to be privileged. Ultimately, it's important to establish that the purpose of it is for the obtaining of legal advice rather than just getting the facts.
Yep.
And for that reason, it's something that needs to be thought about in advance, whether these documents you intend them to retain legal professional privilege or not. And if that's the case, to specify that the purpose of them is for that advice.
And it really has to be going to a solicitor or a legal practitioner in that case, because if the main purpose is for the client to have factual findings and make a decision regarding dismissal, etc., you're not going to get privilege, even if it's been done by a solicitor, the report. It has to be to a solicitor, so a solicitor can look at the factual reports and then give advice, if that's what you're trying to achieve. There was also some argument, which was quite interesting, around waiver of privilege. And waiver of legal professional privilege is a huge, can be a huge difficulty, and there's some really delicate lines and unintended waiver that can occur, particularly in legal proceedings where people attempt to sort of partly disclose contents of legal advice to obtain an advantage in proceedings, which is held then to have waived the entire communication. In this case, it was argued by the employee that the fact that parts of the report had been disclosed to the employee to give him an opportunity to respond was in effect a waiver of the entire privilege, and that was held not to be the case. The disclosure was considered not to be an attempt to achieve by the employer some kind of forensic advantage, but rather just to give the person an opportunity to respond.
And it's not unusual when these sort of investigations do occur that an employee wants a copy of the report, and in most cases the employer doesn't have any obligation to provide that report to the employee, and they usually will summarise the findings, and that's all that the employee is entitled to. But this case was slightly different in that it was the solicitors that instructed the investigator, and that protected the privilege.
I think the issue with the reports, which comes up all the time, almost every investigation I've been involved with, employees all want a copy of the report. The thing is, you can't give the report to employees if it has confidential information about other employees. And that is why, unless forced by a court, which it can sometimes be, you won't give a copy of the report. However, because of procedural fairness, you must make sure that the summary of the information you do give is detailed enough to cover everything to do with the particular employee who is, needs an opportunity to respond.
There's also redacting as well. You see
Yes.
some reports that are so heavily redacted that there's no point giving it in the first place. There's nothing in it.
Yes, which is why I sometimes think it is better to do a summary of the key issues relating to that person. But you've got to make sure that it's accurate, and you've got to make sure that it covers enough material.